Amen. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 11. It starts with a therefore. Okay? Patrick, when you're reading in the Bible and you get to a therefore, what does that tell you?
Something's going to happen.
Well, that's true, but it's also looking backwards, right? It's responding to something that has come ahead. So it's already happened. It's kind of like saying because, right? So something's already happened, and so let's start rereading. Let's just start in about verse 14 of 10. I won't make a whole lot of comments, but I want us to have a running start so we know what this therefore is about. Behold, look. So this is 10:14. The heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's, thy God. The earth also, with all that therein is. So everything you see in the sky to the stars, everything on the earth is the Lord's. Only the Lord had a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. For the Lord your God is a great God, is God of gods, and Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward. He doth execute judgment of the fatherless and widow, and loveth the stranger, in giving him food and raiment. Love ye therefore the stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, him shalt thou serve, to him shalt thou cleave, and swear by his name. He is thy praise, and he is thy God, that hath done for thee these great and terrible things which thy eyes have seen. Thy fathers went down into Egypt 70 persons. Score is 20, so we're talking about 70 individuals that had come out of Israel's loins. Right? These are his direct descendants. Doesn't include the wives of his sons. And now the Lord thy God, in that count, hath made thee as the stars of heaven for a multitude. We don't know exactly how many there were. We have a head count of their military might of men 20 years and older is about 600,000. So you've got wives, you've got children, and obviously they procreated quite frequently. There was a massive number. So you're talking roughly 2 million folks that the Lord has been caring for in this wilderness journey for 4 decades. And so to go from 70 to that in just, really a couple hundred years is very dramatic. Therefore, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and keep his charge, and his statutes, and his judgments, and his commandment always, right? It all belongs to him. He is a great and mighty Lord. He has done these wonderful and terrifying things. He has blessed you as a nation already. Therefore, love him. Keep his charge, keep his statutes, keep his commandments, judgments, always. And you know this day, for I speak not with your children, which have not known and which have not seen the chastenment of the Lord thy God, his great, his mighty hand, and his stretched out arm. When we have language in the Old Testament that talks about a mighty hand and stretched out arm, it's talking about things that he accomplished. All right, really demonstrated his power when he brought them out of Egypt. And so that's the word picture there with his arm. Sometimes it says his arm is not short, right? If you've ever been in the grocery store and you can't reach the top shelf, right? Your arm's too short. There's things beyond you. God's arm wasn't short. And so that's that picture there with his mighty hand, his stretched out arm. His miracles and his acts, which he did in the midst of Egypt, unto Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to all his land, and what he did unto the army of Egypt, unto their horses and to their chariots, and how he made the water of the Red Sea to overflow them as they pursued after you, and how the Lord hath destroyed them unto this day. And we'll just pause there. All right. Moses, again, God's inspired this, so this is God speaking to them through Moses, but Moses is telling this generation, you've seen these things. I'm not talking to your kids, right? I mean, this is the generation that were children when this happened in Egypt. They had to be less than 19 years old, less than 20 years old, in order to still be alive, because everyone 20 years and older, 38 years ago, refused to go into the land when God said go in. And God said, okay, turn around to the wilderness, you're all going to die off there. And over the course of that period, they all did die. But their children who were alive when they came out of Egypt, they're now they're the grown-ups, right? They're the oldest. He says, I'm not talking to your kids who weren't there and didn't see. I'm talking to you as eyewitnesses. You know what your God has done already. And so he's referencing in shorthand in these two verses his miracles and his acts, which he did in the midst of Egypt, unto Pharaoh and unto all his land and unto his army. There are chapters of material that you probably should go and read back in Exodus that gives you the play-by-play of how God brought all this about in a very dramatic fashion. I'm just going to give a brief recap just so that it's fresh in our minds, because these people would have known, this was not something they would have forgotten, that Moses came on the scene, and the first major event, there were some minor miracles to establish that he was speaking for God, but the first major event was that the Nile River was turned to blood. And the detail that was given with that is that all the fish died, and it stank. And it was like that for a week. So Egypt's main water source and a major feature of their economy, food source, has been dramatically hit. Right? And it just involved Moses lifting his hand, a rod over the water. And it wasn't just the river, it was also ponds and other bodies of water. So they're trying to dig to find water, as God in just a moment is showing how he could take that away. So impacted the water, killed all the fish. Now the water came back, after the week. Fish didn't. They're still dead. Right? So that's the lasting impact. The next thing that happened was there was frogs. Frogs are gross. It says there were so many frogs that they were in people's beds, in their food, in their kneading troughs, in their ovens. I mean, as far as the grand scheme of things, this is probably on the scale of more inconvenience and nasty, and kind of your stuff doesn't, feel clean. But they were everywhere. And then when they were taken away, they had to scrape them up into big heaps, and they stunk. So this is two different, plagues that are involving, the senses of just it's coming down on you, and the smell of rotten decay. And then after that, he turned dust into lice. Again, on a scale of these plagues, this is kind of an irritant. You're itching. It's uncomfortable. But this is the first one that the magicians of Egypt hadn't been able to replicate. They're like, this is the finger of God, dust into lice. And then there became swarms of flies. And these are various types of stinging and biting flies. We get annoyed with gnats. At least they don't bite. You go down to the beach with the sand flies. You're like, ugh. Well, imagine that, but a multitude of varieties. And this is the first time God put a division among these. You know how many flies were in the Hebrews' houses? None. They were just among the Egyptians. And then when God, took away that plague, you know how many were left? Not one. Right? And it explicitly says that. There's, zero left, completely gone. And then after that, God sent a very severe illness on a particular type of cattle. There was 5 different animals that were listed. They were primarily beasts of burden and food sources. So you've got oxes and donkeys and camels and horses, asses, camels, oxen, and sheep. If they were in the field, and in the same day, they all died. You're going to talk about having a hit to your livestock. All of those types, if they were in the field, they all died of the Egyptians. None of the Hebrews. Right? So again, he's able to make this distinction. Then there were boils, blains, pus-filled nastiness that affected all the Egyptians, so much so that the magicians, they couldn't even stand to appear before Moses anymore. And it was on the animals. After that came a very dramatic form of hail that somehow had fire along with it as well. So hail, is that good for crops? Not particularly. Hail that runs along the ground and has fire along with it that burns something that wasn't immediately hit, man, that's pretty devastating. And this, you've already had your fishing industry wiped out. Now, anything that had grown up, and I believe it was the flax and the barley that had already come up at this time of the year, it was smashed, none left, none survived. And all the orchards, it says every branch was broken. So you've got your long-term food production has all been completely decimated. All the crops are crushed. However, the wheat and the rice hadn't come up yet. And Moses said, I know you're going to harden your heart again. There's still additional stuff to come. Well, you fast forward a little bit, and then God sends the catch-all, the locusts. It says these locusts were so in multitude, it was like you'd look out on the ground and you couldn't see the ground. It said every green thing that was left, it ate them all. Right? There was no remnant. There's nothing that was missed. If you ever watched some Discovery Show channels about these massive swarms of locusts that you could see today, and just like this swath that's left behind them, I'm sure whatever they're capturing there in video is mild compared to what happened to Egypt. And then when God takes away the locust, how many are left? Not one. All right? And then there's darkness. Darkness that can be felt, so that the Egyptians had no ability to have light in their houses at all. And so for 3 days, they couldn't even leave their houses. But there was light in the dwellings of the Hebrews. And then you have the final plague where all of the firstborn have all levels of society, from Pharaoh down to, it describes as the, kind of the lowest woman who works grinding behind the mill. And among all the animals of the Egyptians, the firstborn was going to die. And so every aspect of their economy, of their food sources, of their life and comfort, he was able to decimate all of those. And then they leave and get funneled into what looks like a trap. Right? So Pharaoh thought that the land had swallowed them up. They've got some geographic features on either side, and then the Red Sea. And so he comes with his army, all of his chariots, everybody. We're going to get them. We're going to get them back. Why did we let them go? We've got some amnesia here. And God funnels them into this trap where he is going to deliver his people by having a strong wind come through. It blows all night, parts the Red Sea. If you want to replicate this, take a leaf blower to a puddle. Watch what happens. It's pretty fun. But imagine that volume of wind lasting all night. So it's coming in, and it blew it apart. And they walk across on dry land. And the Egyptians are hindered from attacking at first, because God, who had been leading them by this pillar of fire, he brings from behind, and on half the pillar, it's light. So you've got this massive street light projecting through the ocean, so you can see where you're going, the Red Sea. And behind it was the cloud. They had darkness. They couldn't see, they couldn't pass until he let them go forward. And then when he lets them in, he starts afflicting their chariot wheels. Things start getting stuck and falling off. And they realize that the God of these people is against them, and they try to flee. But by this time, the Hebrews have made it all the way across, and God brings down the waters on this entire army in one go, of which his people didn't have to lift up a single sword, and he decimates all of them. And how many escaped? None. How many got across of his people safely? All of them. 100% victory in mercy, 100% victory in wrath. He said, you guys saw this! You were eyewitnesses to this. And then I won't have time to recap the next 40 years. But and how he delivered you in the wilderness for the last 4 decades. Sending, dump truck loads of food to your campsite every day, and leading you to water, and just preserving you, and how he's done all these notable miracles over and over and over and over and over and over again. You've seen that, and you need to remember that, because you're about to face another difficulty, basically. But But he does mention one other event, which I want to talk a little about. So verse 5 says, and what he did unto you in the wilderness, so that massive provision of feeding, of giving water, protecting. Also what he did in smiting some of them when they were complaining and murmuring. I mean, there was fire that came out and burned up some folks. There were some plagues that were destroyed some folks. There was fiery serpents that bit some folks. I mean, there's a lot of notable, terrible, terrifying miracles of remembering who you're dealing with from that. And then in verse 6 it says, and what he did unto Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the sons of Reuben, how the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their households and their tents and all the substance that was in their possession in the midst of all Israel. This is a reference back to Numbers chapter 16. If you haven't read that recently, go read the whole account. We're in the period where they've already refused to go in, and so they've been sent back to the wilderness. At some point during that, at least 3 men who are kind of the ringleaders of this lead a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, right? Saying, Moses and Aaron, you've taken too much authority upon yourselves. We're all holy. Obviously the God is in the midst of us. We should be able to lead too. And so Moses basically gives them a challenge. He says, all right, we'll let the Lord show who is, to serve him and who's not. And so he says, tomorrow, everyone get a censer, come bring it and burn incense before the Lord, and we'll see what happens. And Aaron, you do that too. Now, under the law, only Aaron and his sons were authorized to burn incense. That was a job reserved for the priests. The priest had to be a descendant of Aaron. All right? That's how God set it up. And these men are saying, we don't care what God said. We want to take that. And one of them was a Levite. And so they had a very special job in caring for the tabernacle. But these other 2, Reuben descendants, that was none of their business to start with. Well, these 2 guys, Dathan and Abiram, say, Moses, we're not going to meet you there with a censer. This smells like a trap to us. We're going to stay at our tents. And he says, you need to come up here. And they said, we're not coming up there. You're going to put out our eyes. This is a trap. And so Moses comes down. Well, a couple other details. God threatens to kill the entire congregation because of this, right? They're rebelling. And these 3 guys have 250 princes who are going along with it. So they have some significant political people who are in their corner. And God says, I'm just going to wipe them all out. And Moses and Aaron please say, don't destroy the whole people for the sake of these guys' sins. And so they go down to the tents of Dathan and Abiram, and God tells them, you tell those people who are camped beside them, get away. And the people listen. They got up and they moved far away from those tents. And out of those tents walked Dathan and Abiram. These are the 2 sons of Reuben, and their wives and their children, everybody that kind of belongs to their families. And Moses says, here's how you know if God sent me. If these men die a normal death, God didn't send me. But if God does something right now that has never been done before, and they die in a very unusual way, and I'll tell you the unusual way, if the earth opens up and swallows them, then you'll know that the Lord sent me back. Because this was not something Moses asked for, and specifically Moses tried to get out of it. Right? He was tried several times to back out. And so as they're standing there, he said that it describes the earth opening up and all of these men and their tents and their families and their cattle all falling in alive, and then the earth closing. Yeah. And these people that Moses is talking to saw that. It's like, remember all these things. Remember specifically what he did to Dathan and Abiram. But your eyes have seen all the great acts of the Lord which he did. So, therefore, right, Patrick? Therefore, because of all this, therefore shall you keep all the commandments which I have commanded you this day, that you may be strong and go in and possess the land whither you go to possess it, and that you may prolong your days in the land, right? Prolong means to extend, right? When they start disobeying him, there's the idea that they're going to be expelled from it. in the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers to give them, and to their seed, a land that floweth with milk and honey. And we talked about that last week, about that expression of milk and honey. Shows the abundance of natural resources that are there, right? To have milk, you've got to have water, you got to have grass, you got to have a place for your cattle to grow, and honey, you've got the flowers, right? This is in a desert, arid area, you have this wonderful land. And in fact, it describes it, it says, it's not like Egypt. For the land whither thou goest in to possess it is not as the land of Egypt, from whence ye came out of, where thou sowest thy seed and waterest it with thy foot, as a garden of herbs. All right, Patrick, what does it mean? Do I hold out my foot and water my plants? It is? What does it mean?
You had to do it.
Yeah, you had to carry water to it. You either had to water it by hand or you had to build irrigation ditches, right? We've read some books about Egypt, about these massive irrigation structures they had, which funneled off waters from the Nile. He says, this land isn't like that, where you have to irrigate it or water it by hand. So a garden of herbs, that's like your little herb garden outside your house where you've got to carry your water to it. He says, this land is not like that. But the land whither ye go to possess is a land of hills and of valleys, and drinketh water of the rain of heaven. So God waters it himself, right? Y'all ever had seen the difference in things that grow between when you're trying to irrigate it versus they get enough rain? Right? There's a pretty massive difference. So the land which the Lord thy God careth for the eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year even unto the end of the year. So that's an expression there. Does God's eyes ever look off of anything? Right? He sees all things, but the idea here is this land always has what it needs. All right? It's going to have all the rain. It's not where you got a real good time and then the rest of the year just really stinks, but he's always, caring for it. And it shall come to pass that if you hearken diligently, listen and pay attention, unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Have we heard this before? Yeah, this is a repeat, at least second, maybe third time already. Deuteronomy 6:5. So here's the promise there. You hearken and you observe, you love him, that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn, thy wine, and thy oil. So there's particular timings of these heavier rains, that God's going to bring it just at the right time, so for their crops they grow just the right way for the different things, the different seasons. But he's making it conditional, right? That they had to comply, to obey. And I'll send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Here's the warning. Take heed to yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. What will be the consequence? And then the Lord's wrath will be kindled against you. All right? You kindle a fire, and so the imagery there is this fire is being stirred up. The wrath is kindled against you, and he shut up the rain of heaven, and there be no rain, and the land and the land yield not her fruit, and lest ye perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord giveth you. Right? So there's a direct consequence. Right? So that even the weather, the nation of Israel had the opportunity to have the best of the best of the best of the best, if they obeyed. And even in that ideal circumstance, what was shown over and over and over again is that the sin within man, he would not. Right? He would not. He could not. And so here, it was even promising ideal weather if they obeyed, and that it would be a hardship when they didn't. Just random quiz. Remember Ruth? Why did Ruth's husband and their family leave Israel? There was a famine in the land. There was a time where the people in Israel, there wasn't enough food. You know what Bethlehem means? House of bread. Right? Beth, house of bread. They left the house of bread and went to Moab, their enemy, right, to go find food. Why do you think it was that there was a famine in the land? Well, during the time of the judges, the nation frequently would do what every man saw was right in his own eyes, rather than looking what was right in the Lord's eyes. And so they're serving all these other gods. And so you can see, that story just, way in the future. You're talking. Let's see. Boaz was a first generation born in Israel. We know that because his mama was Rahab the harlot, the one who saved the spies. So it's not terribly far in the future, but he was an old man then, so you may be 100 years down the road. But this promise and then the consequence shows up. Okay? Therefore, shall you lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. This is the second time we've heard this, right? From back in Deuteronomy, I think that was 6 as well, when you're talking about teaching your children that the words of God need to be bound up in your heart and in your soul, your very breath, your life. Let them be a part of you, as much as not physically binding them on your hand, so that, as often as you're looking at your hand, you're thinking about the Word of God and His commandments. And ye shall teach them your children, speaking of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. We've got almost a duplicate of Deuteronomy 6. Right? If you ever wonder why I repeat myself, sometimes we need to hear things more than once. Right? Do your children ever hear you say something more than once? Yeah. Well, so God is here repeating. And if it's in Scripture once, it's important. It needs to be observed. If it's told more than once or twice or thrice, and heads up. Pay attention. And thou shalt write them upon the doorpost of thine house and upon thy gates. Why? That thy days may be multiplied, and the days of your children in the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. So this conditional covenant, it wasn't just as long as they obeyed. They had a duty to teach their children so they would know, so they would obey, so their time would be well upon the land too. Do you know what happened after Joshua's generation died? The very next generation, the kids that he's talking about here, that I'm not talking to them now, those kids grew up and they started worshiping other gods. Yeah. That your days may be multiplied, and the days of your children in the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven upon the earth. For if you shall diligently keep all these commandments which I command you, to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways, and to cleave to them, then will the Lord drive out all these nations from before you, and you shall possess greater nations and mightier than you. Right? Remember, they've got a big task ahead of them from a man's perspective. And it's not just fighting one country, you're fighting 7 countries, 7 groups of people. Each individually are stronger than you, more fortified than you, taller than you, and there's more of them than you. These ain't good Vegas odds. But the kicker is that the Lord's the one who's going to be doing the fighting as long as you are walking in His ways, loving Him, seeking Him. Right? That was the condition. Every place whereon the soles of your feet shall tread shall be yours. From the wilderness, all right, the wilderness means the uninhabited portion, and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even unto the uttermost sea shall your coast be. All right, you have a rough legal description described here. So as you're coming out of Egypt, you've got a wilderness. You've got Esau's land that's told not yours. You've got Moab's land that's told not yours. You've got Ammon's land that's told not yours. You've got this chunk on the east side of the Jordan River. North of Canaan is Lebanon. North of that, all the way up to the Euphrates River. That's much, much farther than Israel will really conquer and control really until Solomon's reign. And even his, it's probably more of an economic control. But that's what he's describing, is this kind of this big shape up to the Euphrates River, wilderness down here to Egypt, and then the Great Sea is the Mediterranean. So these data points tell you, what am I talking about? He said, all these places where you walk, this will be your land. There shall be no man able to stand before you. Right? Your enemies will not be able to stand and fight against you. Why? For the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land that ye shall tread upon, as he hath said unto you. When those spies go into Jericho and they talk to Rahab, she tells them, we've heard of y'all. We've heard of what your God did. We heard you were coming, and our hearts did melt, and there was no strength within us. I mean, this takes, the kind of the psychological warfare of propaganda and, discouraging the other side, and makes that look like child's play. I mean, God literally can take all the courage out of these enemies and just turn them into just puddles. And he said, I'll do that. So they won't be able to stand before you. But behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. All right, so these are both promises. A blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, and a curse if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way, which I command you this day, to go after other gods which ye have not known. Right? And we know that that's going to happen. Right? Those blessings and those curses will come to pass. And it shall come to pass that when the Lord thy God hath brought thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, that thou shalt put the blessing upon the Mount Gerizim and the curse upon Mount Ebal. So the way Moses is describing this, it shall come to pass when the Lord thy God hath brought thee in. Is there any question about that? No, he stated, this is a fact. This will happen in the future. You will be brought in. This is the instruction of what you do. And there's going to be a ceremony in the time of Joshua where they take the people and they kind of split them in two. Some groups are standing on the top of one mountain, Mount Gerizim. Some are on the other mountain, Mount Ebal. And they are going to recite out loud both the blessings and the curses that are associated with obeying or disobeying. And so 30 says, are they not on the other side of Jordan, referring to those two mountains, by the way where the sun goeth down? Okay, what direction does the sun set? West, all right? So that's the same. From where they're at, those two mountains are both to the west, all right, other side of Jordan, in the land of the Canaanites, which dwell in the champaign over against Gilgal, beside the plains of Moriah. For ye shall pass over Jordan to go in to possess the land. Remember, the Jordan River is what separates them now, which the Lord your God giveth you, and ye shall possess it and dwell therein. And ye shall observe to do all the statutes and judgments which I set before you this day. All right, so that event of the splitting, that actually, of the people and putting on those two mountains, that occurs in Joshua chapter 8. And they actually take and build an altar, and then they cover it with plaster, and they write the whole law on that at that time. So this is him instructing them, when you get over there, you need to do this.